Well, hello, friends, and welcome to a Hasty Podcast. I'm your comeback queen, Weston Hasty, and you're listening to a Hasty Podcast, where I take you on a journey. That's right. Yeah, that's definitely what we do here. I take you on a journey through my mind and what is going on inside of it at the given time during which I record this podcast. Welcome to my weird little podcast where we discuss a number of things. The general usual topics tend to be like video games or like movies and shows or entertainment or social media news, that kind of thing. It's a very general podcast. Probably a terrible idea. I feel like if I had one central topic, like I only talk about X, right? Only games or something. I feel like you would know what to expect from this podcast, but there is a reason I named this podcast after myself, and I think that's because the common thread isn't any given topic. It's me, baby. What am I doing? I'm just rambling. Hi, we haven't posted a podcast in some time. It's been some time now. I apologize. I just got busy. I've been busy with just life and a lot of stuff going on in my head that I needed to clear out and really focus on myself as opposed to like this podcast and some of the other things that I was doing at the time. But I'm back at it, and we can discuss some of that here in a moment. It's June, everybody. It's June. That's right. I don't know what that means. It doesn't mean much. Maybe this is the topic for today. I don't know. Maybe it is. We'll see how long I can talk about it. June is Pride Month. I don't know. This is gonna sound kind of dumb, maybe for some of you. For some of you, maybe it won't. I don't know, because I surely am not alone. In the past, I was never someone who paid much attention to what that meant. Right? Like what Pride Month meant or why I should care or whatever. It seemed to me like Pride Month. And when I say Pride Month, I think it just goes by Pride Month, but maybe LGBT Pride Month. I'm not entirely sure what it goes by, but I think I've heard Gay Pride Month, LGBT Pride Month, just generally Pride Month. I've heard those phrases used, I think. So I'm pretty ill informed about it, but I think that's my point, is that in the past I've been very uninformed about what that is. There are all kinds of other days throughout the year. I'm sure, like Pi Day, you know what I mean, on like, what is it, March 14th, because it's like March is the third month and 14 days, 3.14, Pi Day, right? Or like May the 4th. The 4th of May is like Star Wars Day, because May the 4th be with you, right? Those are like random days that have no bearing or significance on society whatsoever, but we've all just arbitrarily decided that those days are significant for some random topic, right? That's what I always just kind of assumed Pride Month was that at some point in time in the past, in history, maybe a bunch of, I don't know, gay people or lesbian people or bi people or the whole group of them came together and decided, let's make this an entire month celebration of our sexuality. That's what I assumed it came from. I just assumed it came from probably like social media or something like that, like how a lot of those other days that I mentioned before kind of come from, I think. Maybe I'm wrong about that too. But that was always my assumption in the past. I never bothered to really educate myself on the topic. I've done a little bit of light research here lately, and this might come as a surprise to you as it came as a surprise to me. Is that Pride Month actually started at some point and has significance for people. And that was news to no, this sounds stupid. It was news to me. It started as far back as 1970, I think, was the first event, because what Pride Month was commemorating, and I guess still commemorates, I just didn't know it, was these Stonewall riots that took place in New York City, right? Yeah, New York City. in 1969. I don't remember what day it was, but it was in June 1969. The Stonewall riots, which are so named after the Stonewall Inn, which was a gay bar, is a gay bar, I think it's still up, is a gay bar in New York City. And I guess, apparently, I didn't know any of this. This is all brand new. This is brand new information to me, by the way. Like, I just learned this stuff. So if I get anything wrong, I apologize. I guess it was the routine thing to do in New York City in 1969 and probably before for the police and other official figures, authority figures, to generally harass openly, not straight individuals. And that included raiding, like, gay bars and stuff, and, like, dragging gay people out into the streets, I guess, for reasons I don't comprehend. I mean, it was a different time. I wasn't around in 1969. It was a different time, for sure. And obviously, like, that's not okay. You can't just drag people out of establishments because they have a non-straight sexuality. I don't know. I can't wrap my head around that. I mean, I'm sure at the time it was pretty darn normal. But now, today, I can't wrap my head around being that discriminatory towards someone's sexuality. And to be fair, I suppose, that is still a thing in other parts of the world today, I'm sure. And I can't name any of them without probably being wrong. But there is still, I think we can all agree, wide discrimination for people that hold some kind of difference from whatever the norm is. So if it's sexuality, if straight is the norm, then anything that's not straight would be therefore weird and therefore should be discriminated against, right? That's the idea. It's crazy. It's crazy that is the way it is in some places and pretty much everywhere, at least at some point in time. So I'm getting a little sidetracked. Stonewall riots. In 1969, there was a raid on this gay bar. I don't understand why or how that even comes to happen. But this time, instead of the police just, I don't know, like hauling gay people off to the pound or something, I don't understand. Instead of that happening, there was a riot. The gay people fought back. As well as, whatever other sexualities were represented, transgender, lesbian, whatever is at the bar, right? People rose up and decided, no, we've had enough, and fought against the man at the time. I'm kind of laughing about it now. I'm sure it was absolutely very serious, probably still serious, but I'm just learning about this and it blows my mind. So I guess that's how I'm dealing with it. And that happened in 1969, and then the first event organized to commemorate it happened a year later. There were riots that took place for days, apparently, and as a result of these riots, discussions around removing laws that discriminated against non-straight individuals, as well as implementing new laws that protected groups of people that were previously discriminated against, putting those into place. That was the idea, right? And so the first event to commemorate that was in 1970, and that's how Pride Month started. So remember, I said I thought this was something that started on social media by a bunch of random people arbitrarily one day. This predates social media by a tremendous deal of time, because this is the 2021 now is the 51st anniversary of Gay Pride Month, right? Since the Gay Pride Month started in 1970. So it's the 51st anniversary. Last year would have been the 50th. That's actually really, I guess that's actually really exciting. Too bad the pandemic shut down pretty much everything. I don't know if there were any parades and stuff. I remember hearing about gay pride parades and stuff like that around this time in years past, but I paid it no attention. I really didn't ever pay that kind of thing any mind because I didn't really think it affected me as a not gay individual. But I think definitely some things have changed over time. Like I said, the bar that this all started at was a gay bar. And I think that this month really focused and started around the concept of gay pride and that kind of thing, right? And the way I see it now, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you see it too. Typically what I see June being celebrated for is I see less about the Stonewall event, the Stonewall riots today than I see so many more people using the month to celebrate their sexuality in general, as opposed to any other time throughout the year when maybe you feel like you can't celebrate it. I don't know. It's it's all new information to me. And so, yeah, I wanted to talk about that a little bit and just mention the history, because if you didn't know about it, I wanted to share that along, that there is actual history behind Pride Month, and I didn't know that, and I feel so silly for not knowing it. And now that I do know it, I'm actually really interested in maybe attending an event or something at some point in time. Probably not this year, because we're well on our way through June and I've made zero plans, so it's probably not going to happen. But now that I know it actually holds some kind of significance, I'm actually very interested in the history of these events and how they've come to be. And I think if anything, that just really goes to show that it's never too late to learn about something. Just because something's been going on around you for years and you've known vaguely about it, but you've never taken the time to learn about it, it's not too late to go out and learn these things. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to try to learn more about that. And, I figure how do I word this? I've become, particularly over the last, it's been about a year. It's completely unrelated to the pandemic, I promise you. But it's been roughly about a year that I've started questioning my own sexuality in a lot of ways. But like also not in a lot of ways. But I was doing a lot of research. This was about a year ago, maybe probably a bit over a year ago, because it was before pandemic. It was before pandemic. This was all coincidental. I laugh about it because then the pandemic happened and like no one was allowed to see anyone, so it was a thing. But I was starting to question a little bit labels. I became curious. I think it started with the curiosity first, and then it started. I had some questions that I wanted to answer. So the curiosity was this, right? Is that because I've taken some classes in college. I think this is what kind of really started to introduce me to some new terms that I had never been confronted with before. And in college, I had taken a number of classes that introduced me to terms like terms or definitions. I have to think about that. But like, I come from a small town, small school, conservative community, that kind of thing. Never really gave it much thought. I knew gay people existed, right? And then as I went off into the world and met tons of new people that identified in tons of different ways, and I took some classes and I learned about the different sexualities and the different representations of one's gender, that kind of thing. At some point, a little over a year ago, I started becoming like a little bit more seriously curious about like where some of the terminology comes from and what some of it means, and like the flags that they have for different sexualities and that kind of thing. I wanted to know more about it. I felt stupid. I felt like I didn't know things about these terms. Like, what does pansexual mean, right? What is an asexual? What is a gray sexual? What is a demisexual? What is the difference between a pansexual and a bisexual? If you're non-binary, how does that affect sexuality? This kind of thing. Transgender stuff was very confusing to me. I'm a little ashamed to admit it because I was very flippant about it in the past, but for the longest time, I never understood transgender. Like, if you were a man that transitioned to a woman, I didn't know if you were he or she. Like, I was so dumb that like I didn't even understand, which maybe I'm being unfair to myself. The point is that I didn't educate myself in these topics. I would call people the wrong thing. I didn't understand. I needed to educate myself. So as I became curious and started doing more research on my own about these different topics it was really hard to figure out where to start, because you don't know. You're like, what do I Google? What do I want to Google? Where do I start? But I started looking into some stuff. And the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to sort of relate it to my own life, right? I'm doing all this research. I'm looking into it. I'm like, how do I relate this to my own life? And I started thinking about it a little bit more seriously, trying to read these descriptions, reading people's stories that I saw like in forums or watching videos on YouTube, people talking about their sexuality, that kind of thing. I started thinking about my own sexuality a little bit, and I started realizing that there were some people's stories that made me think of me a little bit, and other people's stories that I thought I would connect to, I didn't relate to. And I started thinking about myself a little bit, and I was trying to figure out, like, wait a minute, what if I can be more accurate with my own definition of my own sexuality? How do I do that? What terminology do I need to look for? And that's actually when I discovered that you can be a different kind of romantic than you are of a sexual, if that makes sense. It will in a bit, because I'm going to explain myself in a little bit. But what I found out is that, and you hear about it, people talk about how sexuality is a spectrum, right? A spectrum. I'm sure you've heard spectrum before. And for some people, that makes perfect sense. But for people that are on the outside, that haven't had the time to educate themselves, spectrum just sounds like a buzzword. I will be the guy, look, if someone needs to say it, because everyone just says spectrum like it makes sense. But if you're on the outside and you haven't done your education on this, it doesn't. It just sounds like a buzzword, right? It just sounds like foo-foo language, all right? And the idea of it being on a spectrum sounds like it's a slider, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, at least in the way I look at it. I think when people see spectrum, right, if you're on the outside, what most people tend to think of is that there are two options, right? You're either straight, which is like, say, the left side of the spectrum, or you're gay / lesbian, depending on if you're a man or a woman, which, by the way, is already problematic because you could be man, woman, neither, both, right? Depending on if you're binary or not, and whether or not you identify. Anyway, it's a thing. But if you're on the outside, bear with me. So on the left, it's like straight. On the right, it's like gay or lesbian, right? And spectrum is anywhere in between. So any person could be some degree of either perfectly straight, perfectly gay, or mostly straight but kind of gay. That's what spectrum sounds like when you're on the outside. And that is not an accurate description of what that means. And if you're on the outside, I think that's the visual people sometimes have. At least that's the visual I had back when I was less educated on the topic. So I needed to know how to educate myself. And as it turns out, I think spectrum is better described as, and I don't have a good word for this myself because I'm still new at this, but instead of like left and right, when you hear the word spectrum, instead of thinking left and right, there's a left, a right, an up, a down. And in fact, it's 4D. It's 4-dimensional here. It's not just a plane. It's also got depth, a field, right? I think so. The way I tend to see it is that you have... The reason there's the left, right, up, down is because you can have different attractions to not just sex, but also to gender, and you can also be attracted to... like sort of like specifics about people. So like you can... Attraction is very difficult to explain. Like say you're straight. If you're listening to this, there's a good chance you're straight just because that's a large percentage of the world population. So if you're listening to this and you're straight, just think about it for a sec. If you're a man that likes women, do you find yourself sexually attracted to literally every woman you have ever seen, period, without exception? Probably not. If you are, that's you. That's fine. I'm just saying, if you think about it, just because you're straight doesn't mean you're attracted to every single opposite-sexed person ever, period, without exception. Same thing if you're, like, gay. Say you're a man that likes men. You don't like every man that you see, period, without exception, sexually. Right? So that's why it has to be a field, because there are many elements that go into sexual attraction that isn't just the other person's sex. And that's why, again, like with the spectrum thing, that's why there's also depth. Because then there's also degrees of sexual attraction, where on, say, the far foreground is like highly sexually motivated individuals, right? If you're a very sexual being. Whereas maybe in the depth, like way in the background, on the opposite end of the depth spectrum is asexuality, where there is just no sexual attraction whatsoever. And then there is space in the middle for people that really aren't all that sexually attracted. Maybe they are sometimes, maybe they aren't. But the reason there's depth is because even then, say you are a gray sexual or a demisexual or a semisexual, where you're mostly or some degree of asexual. You're not really sexually interested in people, but sometimes you are. But there are rules or specifics that go into making up when you are sexually attracted to someone. And that's actually where I discovered I fell. I went through a lot of words and phrases to try to figure out what best describes me, because that's what I was trying to figure out. I was trying to figure out if I, side by side, pro, con, I don't know, if I look at all the information I'm given, how can I best describe my feelings? I wasn't trying to say, what am I? I was trying to say, what describes me? And I discovered that I'm not really that interested in sex. Which started answering a lot of questions for me that I had in the past about like why I'm not a real go-getter when it comes to relationships, right? I'm not someone who feels like I need to be in a sexual relationship with a partner. And I've just never felt that way. I've never seen an attractive woman in public. Honest. I've never seen an attractive woman in public ever, period, and said, I would like to have sex with her. Ever. That was a huge realization for me, because I've routinely spoken to straight men that are like, oh, look at her. Oh man, wouldn't you like to tap that? Or some degree of random machoism, right? Something like that. It's like, oh man, look at her. I'd really like to get me some of that. And I would be like, I guess, sure, man, okay. And when I made that realization about myself, I realized that, like, oh, maybe my story is a little bit more complicated than I ever gave it credit for. I've always just identified as just straight male, right? Turns out it's a little bit more complicated than that. I do identify as hetero-romantic. I would prefer a romantic relationship with a woman. And romantic. But I realized that when it came to the sexual end of the spectrum, that I identified more on the gray sexual end of the spectrum, which is in the sort of asexual umbrella. I'm not so deep into the asexual spectrum that like there's zero physical attraction basically to other people. And I didn't want to identify as demisexual, which, just to give you a brief overview, demisexual is more like you have to form a deep, intimate, like intellectual or emotional bond with someone before you're even remotely sexually attracted to someone. I thought I might be demisexual, but I had some doubts. I thought maybe gray sexual was the one that gave me a little bit more wiggle room on that one, because demisexual sometimes kind of felt right, but sometimes kind of didn't feel right. So, and gray sexual's really kind of catch-all for people that kind of fall in between sexual and asexual. For basically, there are a set of things that you look for in terms of sexual attraction that might trigger you being interested in someone on that level. But otherwise, for the most part, there's no sexual interest. And that's where I lie. So it's like I'm interested in women, but I don't want to bang all the women that I've been interested in. I don't. And when I started realizing that was the case, I realized that I could more accurately represent myself, I think, in relationships. It's still a struggle. Because for the vast majority of my life, I didn't know that about myself. I just assumed that I was straight, and that when I didn't feel as straight as I should be, that there was either something wrong with me or that I was doing relationships wrong. And I tried to force a lot of things that I wasn't interested in doing, like the sex. I would try to force that on myself when I really wasn't that interested, because that's what you're supposed to do as a straight man. That was the idea. And I didn't realize that I was being like hard on myself. I didn't realize that I was basically torturing myself into doing something I didn't want to do. I didn't know that. I didn't understand that yet. And it's taken me most of my life to realize that, the reason right? The reason I'm not into that is because I'm not that way. So this is my so you're listening to basically my because I haven't talked about this publicly. There's been a couple instances where I've kind of alluded to it on the internet, but other than like actually coming out and saying it straight off the bat, this is basically my coming out podcast episode. Not that it's that crazy or anything. I think there's plenty of people that have it way harder than me. People that are sexually attracted to a demographic of people that they're not accepted for being interested in. Like, say you're gay, but you're hiding it from all your friends and family that you're straight, right? I think that's very hard, and I think that's way harder than my personal journey, in my opinion. I think I've had it relatively easy because I still identify as hetero-romantic. So I've been able to more or less pass as straight all my life without even knowing myself that it was a little bit more complicated than that, right? So in terms of that, I've had it relatively easy, but at the same time, I think no matter who you are or what you identify with or what describes you, I think it is important that we should question ourselves about everything that we use to identify ourselves and describe ourselves. If you've never given it a second thought before, if you've just always assumed a thing about yourself, maybe take a moment to actually deeply question yourself about those assumptions, just to be sure they're true. Just to check in on yourself. Not to say that you're necessarily hiding something, but you might even find out that the thing that you thought about yourself is just a little bit more complicated or a little bit more detailed or a little bit more complex than you ever gave it credit for. And once you explore that and dive deep into that, you can maybe start to actually like find ways to be happier with yourself in certain situations and contexts. For example, for like the sexuality thing, for myself, I no longer feel the pressure, right? Because I'm not trying to pretend I'm someone else. I'm not trying to feel pressured into doing something I'm actually uncomfortable doing. And that makes me happier as a person. I don't feel the need that, I'm not out on the town. I don't even... This is so not me. I don't even know what regular people do. I'm not on the town every weekend looking for some panties to drop. So for a long time, I'm like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not out doing this? That's what it seems like everyone else is doing. And I found out I'm not doing that because that's not who I am. And I don't have to keep pressuring myself to go out and do that because that's not who I am. I think for some people that's an easier revelation than it is for others. So that's why I just wanted to take the time to say, think about it yourself, kind of explore that topic a little bit. And I mean, you might already know stuff about you, and you're like, I have done my exploration. I know what I'm about, and that's perfectly okay as well. But if you haven't, Pride Month might just be the opportune moment to do so and come out and start being a little bit more accepting of yourself and open with who you are to everyone else. That's been my Pride Month episode for the podcast. We're back. I'm going to start doing more of these podcasts, like daily or semi-daily or something. Just stay tuned. If you're listening to this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all my latest releases. If you're listening to this anywhere else, the Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Anchor, etc., then make sure you're either followed or subscribed or whatever you need to do to keep up to date with these podcasts. If you have suggestions for content I should cover on these podcasts, you can hit me up on Twitter. Find me at Weston Hasty. You can let me know what you think about this episode or any other episode you listen to, or if you have any suggestions or comments, you can leave them there. That is where I am the most active. I've got plenty of other stuff to talk about. I've got some video games I want to talk about next, and we'll do that in the next episode. And if you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do so for free is by sharing the podcast with friends and family and letting them know who I am and what I'm about. And maybe they'll enjoy listening to this short little podcast. from time to time. If you want to support financially with your money, you can do so at patreon.com/Weston Hasty, where you can contribute as little as $1 a month to help support what I do. All the proceeds help fund my artistic endeavors. My eventual goal is to live off of these different projects that I do, which includes this podcast as well as some of my other YouTube projects as well. To fully fund myself as an independent artist and creator is my eventual goal. So if you would like to see me do that, you can do so through any of those different ways. But other than that, I'm gonna call it quits at this time. Thank you all so much for listening. Until next time, take care of yourselves and wash your hands. Bye.